Politico cybersecurity reporter Eric Geller is in Arlington, Virginia. Eric, thank you for joining us. I'm curious if there was a moment that stood out to you in this hearing today.
Well, I think the clip that you just played was one of them. I think it speaks to a theme that we saw, which is these are intelligence professionals. They work for the president, but they've been, especially in the case of Director Clapper, they've been doing this for decades. They are very reluctant to wade into politics, but they are striking back at what we've seen, especially over the past few weeks, with Trump criticizing the intelligence community, the career professionals, especially saying that they were responsible for bad assessments. These are people who lead those professionals, and here they are trying to avoid politics, but also trying to stand up for their workforce.
There were reports that Trump planned on overhauling the U.S. intelligence infrastructure, but now the transition team is calling those reports completely false. I'm curious, what do you make of this, considering that the president-elect has yet to name a pick for the director of national intelligence?
Well, it could be that he is waiting because he doesn't fully understand what the position does or needs more information before he makes a decision. It could also be that up until recently he thought he might decide to get rid of it, and so he didn't necessarily need to do a lot of vetting for those candidates. We had heard several names being mentioned. Carly Fiorina was one name. Former Senator Dan Coats is another. So it seems like they're sort of settling in on keeping that position. But of course, we have also heard that they're considering ways to restructure the CIA, which I think is interesting because it sort of reflects the president-elect's belief that we need fewer people in Washington and more people sort of out in the field gathering the information as opposed to perhaps processing it back home.
Eric, you cover this area of intelligence, cybersecurity. Tell me, is there a sense in the intelligence world that there needs to be some sort of rethink when it comes to how intelligence is structured?
I think there's a lot of support for reforming the DNI post, probably not getting rid of it. But look, this is a thing that was set up directly after the September 11th attacks. It hasn't had too many reforms since then. There was, of course, the USA Freedom Act, which was passed recently, but that wasn't a huge structural reform to the office. So I think, yeah, there's probably some people out there who will say, look, we've been operating under one structure for more than a decade. It may not necessarily be optimized for the cyber threat. I mean, I don't know how many people thought that cyber was going to be as big as it is now. Immediately after 9/11, there was probably more of a focus on kinetic terrorism. So perhaps there is a restructuring that could gain some broad support in the community. But I think what you're going to see is the president-elect is going to come into office. He's going to talk to especially the career people, but also people like Clapper who are on their way out. And he's going to get the sense that if the intelligence community doesn't want something, there's a lot of bureaucratic resistance that they can put out.
There's some talk that there needs to be a totally separate entity that monitors and looks at cybersecurity. Do you see that as something that could happen in the next 4 years?
Probably not, just because, again, there's a lot of bureaucratic inertia. People like the offices that they have. They like the positions of power that they have. They like the structures that they have. This is another problem that you're seeing in Congress for the lawmakers who want to restructure the committee system. Mike McCall, who's the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, wants to make essentially the cybersecurity reporting structure a lot more streamlined. He wants fewer committees to have jurisdiction so that it's a lot more clear who the agencies report to. And he's had a lot of trouble getting a bill to do that through the different committees because everybody wants to have a say in this, what is essentially becoming one of the most important issues of the day. So I would be very skeptical if there was sort of one big push for a cyber agency in the Trump administration.
There was a hack we had heard about earlier with the Vermont electric company there that initially we thought the power grid was hacked. It wasn't. It was one particular laptop. And then this company issued a statement saying, actually, this wasn't necessarily Russia. It was one laptop. Do you think that took the wind out of the Obama administration's look at how they're pushing about Russia being involved in the election hacking? Does it take away from some of the credibility at all, or do people still stand by the fact that Russia is still incredibly powerful when it comes to hacking?
Well, look, the experts who have said that Russia was behind this, both in the private sector and in the government, they certainly have not changed their tune. I've talked to people who were part of these analyses at some of the private firms, and they're certainly not changing their opinion of the election situation. What it does do is give more ammunition to the people who say, hacking is so nebulous, we can never figure out who did it. There are all these false positives. It's very hard to, link a specific action to a specific actor. Now, the intelligence community and the private cybersecurity firms will say that's not true. There are some cases where we can make an attribution pretty definitive. what you had here was a Vermont utility using data released by the government that has been criticized by many experts. The same people who say that the intelligence conclusion is correct also said that this report wasn't really structured very well. It provided information that isn't a sure sign of a Russian intrusion. Some of the internet protocol addresses, not to get too technical, but some of the data in this report, this is information that is not necessarily linked to Russian actors. It's used in various anonymous services that can be used by people anywhere in the world. And so if you see that address in your server log, you might think, well, this is a Russian compromise. Not necessarily, and so I think we may see a lot more false positives in the future, and the question is whether the Trump administration is going to settle into saying, okay, folks, calm down, we know there are false positives, but the Russia thing, yeah, the intelligence community is confident about that.
I enjoyed reading your report on false positives yesterday, Eric. Thank you for that, and thank you for joining us today on CBSN.
Thank you.